to this casting panel, which will be probably the highlight of your week, I'm sure. We've got three really wonderful filmmakers here who have done three very different kinds of films. And but before I start, I know there'll probably be more people straggling in. I just want to find out how many of you people are directors versus how many people. Let's just start with directors. How many people are directors? And how many people are casting people? Anybody? One? Okay. And producers who don't direct? Anybody? Okay, great. That helped us figure out what we're talking about. Okay, so I have over to my immediate right, Rachel Boynton, whose film Big Men is, if you haven't seen it, is absolutely extraordinary and it's worth talking about in terms of casting, but she's one of these maniacs who follows stories for years and looks for characters and willing to throw herself into the line of fire, and I just adore her film. If you haven't seen Big Men, you have to see it. And we'll also talk about our new project. Rohan Spong, which is like bong, but with a sp.
It's kind of like a symbol. I'm still amused by it all these years later.
Has made some wonderful films like T is for Teacher, and his new film, which is playing this week here on Wednesday and Thursday, which is called Winter at Westbeth, which I got to tell you is one of these totally delightful films. It's like a vacation to New York you forgot existed. And Marshall Curry, who I think most of you know of from his 2 Academy nominees and Street Fight and Racing Dreams and his new film Point and Shoot, all of which are extraordinary. So we're going to start by just talking a little bit about the different types of casting, because casting for documentaries, as you know, depends on the type of film you're casting, whether it's verite film where you have the wide open world and subjects that could be just about anything, or if you're following a specific subject and you need to find people who can exemplify that the most. Rachel, we were just talking walking in about the 2 types of films you had to do, the new one, which you can talk a little bit about, and then your last film, Big Men.
Well, the first 2 films I made Big Men, and before that I made a film called Our Brand is Crisis, which is about this group of American political consultants in Bolivia who ran a presidential campaign then. And both Big Men and Our Brand are films that are about worlds that are pretty impossible to get access to. So if you get Big Men is a film about the oil business. Well, it's actually a film about money, but I filmed this American oil company as they were developing the first oil field in Ghana's history in West Africa. And then I also filmed a lot of things in Nigeria, but principally with a group of militants who were blowing up pipelines and demanding more money for their region. So it's a film with access to many, many different kinds of people, all of whom are really hard to get access to.
As long as you're talking about it, you want to roll the clip? Should we do that? That sounds like a segue. Let's go into Big Men, if we can. Am I supposed to sit on that side? Is that what you said, Deborah?
I should be touching down in just a few minutes.
This field is going to be worth a lot of money.
Flowing oil.
An American company has discovered a massive new oil field off the coast of West Africa.
We're looking at a $11 billion development on 1 billion barrels, net to us $2.2 billion, net to the company. This is a substantial oil project.
Cosmo's strategy was clearly higher risk, but also much higher reward.
The work you are coming to do in Ghana merits respect.
We know how important it is for the country, and we intend to do a really good job. So you're going to be proud of us, I promise.
Proud of you.
We're going to be paying out on the pipe. Go about 5%.
When there's a lot of money at stake, people's focus gets more intense, and more people will look to get a piece of it.
This attack highlights the vulnerability of the oil infrastructure here.
winner of Ghana's presidential election.
The previous government was nice to Cosmos. Certain things will have to change.
The goal is to maximize profit, but can you get the cash? Or will there be so many other people and entities involved that you can't earn a profit?
And it's, let's just focus on that for a sec, because access, as we all know, is king for funding, for distribution, access to an interesting topic in an interesting way, and having something exclusive. You have extraordinary access there to big finance, to guerrillas and fighters. Talk about this. What did it take?
Well, in the context of casting, I didn't really have much choice. Like, you get access to an oil company, you don't say, no, you're not the right people, like, I'll go for another oil company. like, that's not, you know.
Did it start with one company you had access to, or you were looking for this story?
Both of my first films, in fact, my third film as well, and I have this unfortunate way of working, which has to do with how my brain works. I keep wishing I were somebody else, but unfortunately, I start with ideas. I get an idea, and I get sort of this like curiosity about a thing. I get a thought, and then I go out into the world and I think I'm gonna make a film about that idea. And so that leads me to sort of delve into a world. I don't start with a story like in the New York Times, which I wish I did, because it would, or a book or something, because that would make life a lot clearer in terms of the path. But this film, I finished our brand, it was really well received, and I wasn't as proud of it as I wanted to be. I thought I could do better. And so I thought to myself, I didn't have any kids at the time, I now have 2. And I thought, I can do something harder and bigger. I want to do something impossible. I'm gonna make a film about the oil business. And then I did a little bit of preliminary research, and I realized that the coast of West Africa was this place that, at the time, the Bush administration was putting a lot of focus on in terms of trying to get more oil from West Africa rather than the Middle East, for political reasons and also because of Israeli lobbyists, but that's a bigger story. Anyway, I said, oh, that's interesting. My parents had met in the Peace Corps. I'd always wanted to make a film somewhere in Africa. So I was like, all right, I'll go to Nigeria. So I bought a plane ticket, and I went to Nigeria, and I didn't know anybody. I had 3, this is like not how you should do it. Okay? I don't recommend this, okay?
This is why so many documentary filmmakers don't have money.
Yeah, no. He just, like, I've been thinking about your comment to me on the phone. He described this film as a summer job gone terribly awry. And it's so true. It was like such a horrible financial decision. But basically, I bought a plane ticket to Lagos. And I had 3 phone numbers in my pocket. One was like a guy that my next door neighbor knew. One was like, I had called some professor at Columbia who gave me the name of a former student who then gave me the name of some NGO dude. And then another one was my husband's business partner's brother's high school friend who'd been a boarding student from Nigeria. None of these people had anything to do with the oil business. And I started that way. That's how I started.
Yeah, and if you watch the film, what you'll see is that, you know, Rachel is one of these dogged documentary filmmakers who, like probably a lot of you, and probably a lot of people here, just spent years finding people who would say yes. And that's one way to go, because access to those people made the subject incredibly interesting. We'll come back to that for a second, because how do you approach people is what we'll get to next. But Rohan, you made this beautiful film. I haven't seen your other films, but this film, Winter in Westbeth, it's playing this week. You should check it out because it's just lovely. Did it start with, how did you get, is it starting with the location or the people or the idea?
I think my process is probably the opposite, in the sense that I find myself attracted to certain individuals, and then kind of the issue of the film, or the issues that circulate in the film, kind of come out later in the storytelling process, after I've spent a lot of time with these characters. So my process is more one of, I guess, kind of doing almost like video portraiture of people, and some of it's interview about what's happening in their lives, and some of it's interview about what's happened in the past in their lives, and there's a little bit of verite of them going about their lives, but it's kind of later that you realise, well, I've done 10 visits to this particular individual. The issue of her health is clearly a reoccurring issue in this story. Or in the case of Westbeth, one of the main characters is Dudley Williams, a dancer from Elvin Ailey and Martha Graham's companies. And he's at a stage in his life where he's no longer dancing professionally, and he's, I guess, coming to grips with how you fill that void in your life. And so, that was an interesting sort of tension or issue that came out of spending time with him and gaining his trust.
We'll roll the clip in a second, but as we all know, a lot of us, there's 100 films in our back pocket we'd like to make, but how do we finance them? And in getting the cast and knowing that they're the right cast and being able to raise the money around them, did you start with the people, or did you start with getting an access agreement with Westbeth?
Westbeth were great. I mean, I think because there's been, lots of stories about various artists in Westbeth, either, written stories in the New York Times or whatever, or, small films or feature docs or whatever, just about one character. So the idea of somebody walking through Westbeth's lobby with a camera and a tripod and taking the elevator up to somebody's apartment is not, so foreign. If it was any other apartment building in the city, probably we'd have issues. But no, they were really... I sent them an email and said, look, I'm making this film at the moment. We're just shooting inside people's apartments. I would like to shoot some of the rest of the building later on. I just want to let you know. And they were great. They gave me complete sort of access. We got, the film opens on the roof of the building, and, we went into the basement and went all over the building. So they were wonderful. They were really marvellous. Yeah.
Can we roll the Winner for Westbeth clip for a second?
Perhaps the trailer, yeah.
Westbeth. Many want to live here, but only a few may do so. The lucky ones.
This is Westbeth Artist Housing. In 1966, the building was purchased to create 385 rent-controlled apartments for artists to live and work. The largest of its type in the world. I'm telling you the truth. Please welcome Dudley Williams.
This man has danced around the planet and back again.
Until I can't dance anymore, I don't see why it's time to turn over my toe shoes.
I've written at least 650 poems. It's wonderful that I contribute something still to the world.
I use eyeshadow to make people look at your eyes rather than they're looking for wrinkles, which of course I don't have. People deserve a better life. That's the beauty of Westbeth. It's a place for dreaming. I have a lot of projects I still want to do. That is what keeps life exciting.
In Westbeth, as one gets older, you think more often of life, the preciousness of it.
Brings up emotional memories, always going on the road, leaving loved ones. So teary-eyed.
If I lost the words, I would be very unhappy. I want to write more poems. I'm not ready to say goodbye. I'm ready to say hello. Am I being filmed in color?
I'm filming you in color, yes.
Oh, that's very nice. I'm happy about that.
All right, we're going to come back and we're going to talk about how you got access to those people in the conversation you had. But Marshall, you said something, we had a little pregame call, and this is just words of wisdom. Marshall, when you start casting a film, what do you start looking for? What's your first words of wisdom?
I gotta say the same thing I said on the phone, I can't remember what it was. I guess I look for charisma, is that what I said? Okay, so yeah, I mean, I am, unlike Rachel, usually drawn to somebody who's gonna be in a situation. And so my first film was about a political race. I had met the candidate that was going to do it. My third film was about a radical environmentalist who was facing life in prison. He was an employee of my wife when the FBI walked into the office and arrested him. So, and then my last one most recent one was Point and Shoot. It was like an email that I got from somebody out of the blue that I'd never heard of. So in those cases, they all three, like there was a person who came across my field of vision and there was something about them that I thought was interesting. Didn't necessarily mean that I thought they were perfect people, that they were, you know, paragons of virtue or anything like that, but there was something about them that I thought was worth exploring. My second film, Racing Dream, which is what my clip is a slightly different example. It's more of the way that you do it, where I thought that NASCAR was an interesting phenomenon, that there could be this huge sport that's, you know, reportedly the second largest spectator sport in America, and yet I couldn't name 2 NASCAR drivers, and I didn't know anyone who knew anyone who could name 2 NASCAR drivers. And so how could that possibly be that I live in this, you know, bubble that doesn't understand this huge phenomenon? And I kind of thought it mapped with the red state, blue state stuff a little bit. So I thought I was interested in that topic, but I didn't really know how to get at it. And then one day I read an article about kids who race these go-karts that go 70 miles an hour in the Little League for NASCAR. And so I thought, oh, that's the way to get at that world. And so I went to a convention of race car drivers that also, of kid race car drivers, a karting convention, that also was the award ceremony from the previous year of the national championships. And I went down with a couple of cameras, a couple of, you know, people that were shooting, and we just fanned out and just went up to any kid that was, you know, between 8 and 12 years old, and we point a camera at them and say, you know, what's your name? Do you like racing? And I had a kind of a list of questions that included, like, why do you like racing, but also what does your room look like, and do you believe in God, and what do your parents do for a living? Because I knew that I wanted to just find out whether people could talk about themselves and whether they had that ineffable sparkle that makes you just want to listen to them. And in the course of 48 hours, I found 3 kids who were very different, who had very different kind of structures to their lives that I thought would be interesting. One's a girl, one lives with his grandfather in North Carolina because his father's has drug issues and his parents both have drug issues, and the other one is like this incredibly smart, disciplined racer who is incredibly polite to adults. And so you kind of had these 3 very different types of characters, each of which had hints of conflicts in their lives. I didn't know what it was going to be, but I knew that if you just spent time with these 3 kids, that something interesting would come from it.
Yeah, go ahead. Roll the clip, and then we'll come back to some thoughts on that.
You're just sweating, and your heart's just beating really, really fast, and I just feel like I'm gonna throw up. But it's so great. You have to be a person that can make a decision and not look back. That's how life goes. Ever since I was just a little 5-year-old, I said, Daddy, I want to be the first woman to win the Daytona 500.
If I'm not racing, I'm not happy. That's really all I care about. Brandon has no fear of nothing.
No matter how much I want to be like all my friends and go to all the parties, I just couldn't give it up.
There's millions of jobs out there, but being a NASCAR driver is the coolest job you could ever have.
Welcome to the Los Motor Speedway, the first race in our National Championship Series.
I've won state races, but National is the best.
These things out here are 70 and 80 mile an hour racing machines.
If you're interested in being a professional driver, this is the series you have to win.
Brandon's got a lot to prove this year, and to win the national championship, he's just going to keep his cool. I don't care how mad somebody makes you cannot retaliate.
Getting excited now?
Yeah, I'm ready. You think that girl's pretty? I don't know. She's a good driver.
Is this Anna? You know who this is?
Kid gets to 12, 13 years old is when you need to decide whether it's going to be a hobby or if they are going to try to make a career out of racing.
If he wants to be a champion, this is the last year he needs
what you're doing.
You just gotta have money, and we never really got you with sponsors and stuff.
When I come to a race, I don't even think about what's going on. Everything goes away. I don't think about anything except racing.
When you're 11 and 12, your whole life is filled with people telling you what to do. But when you're racing, you're totally independent and living the dream.
This is not the best place to sit to watch a movie, by the way. So I've done this a bunch of times as well, where you go off with video cameras and you have a very short amount of time to go through and meet people. Talk about that process, because that happens a lot. I did a film about a school play where there was the auditions, we had that day, we were gonna have to pick people. How did you make your decisions? Did you meet the people? Were you looking at tape? Because a lot of times I've even sent casting people out for that moment.
In this case, I met everybody, so there were a couple of, we were all just sort of circulating, and if somebody said, oh, I think I got somebody, I would go over and talk with them. It's just a gut thing. And I think one of the challenges that sometimes filmmakers get into is that they feel like there's a person who should be the main character, or who they should interview, whose interview they should include in the movie because that person is the foremost expert in blah, 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 or it's somebody who's important, or somebody who was really nice to them and helpful. And I think you have to be kind of brutal about saying, do I want in my gut to listen to and look at this person? And that there are some people who are terrific people, who are good people, who are smart, accomplished, but when you point a camera at them, you don't want to watch them. Like they're just,
you're not
they're
feeling
not.
it as the filmmaker.
Yeah.
And the same thing about the people that sometimes you think they're great, but maybe they haven't identified themselves to you as somebody who wants to be a part of it. Let's talk about that. Do you chase people?
I don't chase people. So everybody, I might make a pitch, but and explain what the goal is. But if somebody doesn't want to do it, I don't want to do it. D.A. Pennebaker said to me once that, he never will make a film about somebody who isn't eager to have them make a film about them. Because, as everybody knows, even if somebody's excited about it, they're gonna start to resent you after a while. Like just the amount of time that you're gonna spend with them and the process, even if they're starting off from a good place. So if they're starting off in a bad place, it's not going to go well. And the only exception to that is if there's an interview with somebody who's a difficult interview, but who you really need to get. And in that case, I'll push hard to get an interview, just because I know that it's a limited amount of time.
Yeah, sometimes, or they'll even walk up to you in a situation like that, and they'll just sort of stand around the camera, and they want to be a part of it. And their heart is just open to it. And I find those people are really attractive, and you have to listen to them even if you don't think they're right. Because sometimes they become the main character because there's a bond, and it's instant and it's chemical. And I had a kid in a film who he walked up, and he was the chubby kid who was picked on, and he became the engine of a film I did.
And you want to watch the outtakes. Like, you're just, everything that they say or do is entertaining.
Yeah, and to your point, and I think everybody here's had that thing where there's this guy, this girl that you know they're great, but they don't want to do it, and they're being difficult. And my experience is it never will get better. And when you need them to be vulnerable and open and let you know that certain things are happening in their lives because you're not living with them, they don't call you. They're as guarded all the way through if they're not open in the beginning. Correct?
Can I interject here?
Yes.
I disagree. Yeah, no, I mean, nobody's ever said yes to me immediately. Nobody says yes to me. Because I start in a very different way, I don't write to the CEO of an oil company and have him say, oh yeah, I want to do your movie. That doesn't happen. So you write, a lot of it is personal chess. Who do I know who might know somebody who might know somebody who might know somebody who I could get to who might know somebody. And then when you finally, nobody says yes to me. And then you have to say, well, why are you saying no? I understand completely. I totally get it. No, that makes total sense. Explain to me why. Let's talk about it. Talk to me about why you don't want to do this. And then I spend like 6 months talking to them about why. And then eventually they say yes, because I don't give up. But like, nobody has said
That's
yes
a
to
good
me.
springboard to how do you approach people and what are you offering? Because you're doing big political topics where people's careers and in fact their lives are on the line. And whether or not it's a kid who, wants, or a senior citizen who's, wants to be seen and heard for who they are, and maybe nobody's asked them for that for a long time, and you're offering that with a clear heart. What are we offering as documentary film people when we go out into the world and there's people we want to share their lives with us? How do you make that pitch? How do you start?
I spend a lot of time, like a lot of time, when the camera's not rolling. I love a good lunch. New York's a great city to do lunch in. But when I pitch the idea of being in a film, I make it quite clear that we'll probably need to spend quite a bit of time together, that I'd like them to tell me about their lives, that I'd like to see any photographs. And yeah, I guess the phrase I use a lot is that I'd like them to tell their own story in their own framework. That they kind of get to decide how to tell that story. And in the end, obviously, when it's edited and when other stories are edited in and when there's establishing shots and there's context, they still are telling their story in their own framework on camera, but it has a different meaning because it's now part of a film.
That's great. And I, when I'm teaching, I also tell the students, people just want to be seen and heard for who they are, which I guess is the whole, what all the people who say Trump won, that's what they're saying, the populace who voted for him. But we don't often, and so you have to go with your heart and your hat in your hand and let them see your belly too. You have to show up, right?
Absolutely, you've got to be present. But I think also, Winter at Westbeth is obviously a film about artists, and these are artists who tend not to get so much attention because of the vintage that they are. And I was interested in what the art of the elderly might tell us about the lives of the elderly. And I think that they were happy to share their stories because it also meant that they were sharing their art with a wider audience.
Rachel, so you are getting in, to situations which are volatile, dangerous. You're approaching people and getting access to things that are startling. How do you make the pitch? How do you walk into a room and say, I want to turn a camera on in your business meetings, which could end your career if I actually showed it?
It depends on the person. I would, like you just said, I have this thing that I think about, which is everybody wants to be seen and everybody wants to be mirrored or heard and seen for who they think they are. And so with whatever kind of film you're making, I do think your personal approach to it can make an enormous difference. And my theory for my own work is that people will trust me if I prove myself trustworthy. And I take kind of a big burden onto myself that if I say something, if I make a promise, that there is a certain amount of openness or revelation that I have to be prepared to do if I expect people to be open with me. That it's a two-way street, and that on a very practical level, there are certain things I promise. One, I promise that I will turn off the camera if people ask me to. Like if they say, I want you to stop filming, I stop filming. And I don't film people secretly. That's number one. And they need to have faith, especially when you're dealing with people who are, running a guy for president in a foreign country, or, meeting at Blackstone Capital Partners or whatever. Like, they have to know that you mean that. So A, I turn off the camera. B, I promise to try. I didn't show the militants the film, and I still feel really guilty about it, but there are lots of reasons for that. I promise everybody that I will do my very best to come and show them the film before I show it to the public. That doesn't mean that I'm going to take their notes, it doesn't mean that I'm going to change it, it doesn't mean that, but it does mean that I will show it to them and listen to what they have to say, and put myself in a circumstance where I am going to listen to their response and hear what they have to say about what I've done before I show it to other people. And to me, that's a form of respecting the person that I'm filming. And then in response to something that you just said, I think it's really important to love people. Like, you have to love, and you have to be willing to love people that might not necessarily be completely lovable. And especially in the shooting process, loving the people that you're filming, even if they're not necessarily likable people. Like, finding the thing that you can love in them. When you're in the cutting room, you can be more brutal, just in terms of decision making that you have to make for whatever narrative reasons. But like, when you're filming people and connecting with them, it's really important to love.
Be non-judgmental.
But that's part of love, right? Like, it's like, to me, the work of documentary filmmaking is highly spiritual. It's like really like how I choose to live. Like, it's this endeavor to be open to the world and to listen to it. And that's part of why I start with ideas, because I think about what is it that I want to learn in the world? Where do I want to put my effort in terms of what do I want to learn about? What do I want to be open to? Where do I see interesting questions? And so that's very much a part of the initial process.
Marshall, where do you start with that? How do you, when you approach people, do you show them your work? Do you hope that they'll think about that? What are your thoughts?
I usually don't show people my work. I mean, it's available, so if they
This
want to
is an
look it
interesting
up, they
conversation,
can. But
Marshall's work is very well known, and I find it's really scary if people start thinking about the end product and start censoring themselves or wondering about how people will respond to them in critical situations.
Right. So, yeah, as little as I can have somebody thinking about the process of the movie making, the better. I try to sort of hide any technical challenges or artistic questions or any of that is hopefully completely invisible to the person who I'm spending time with, and to them, it should feel like what the heart of it is, which is somebody who's curious about you, spending time with you, and listening to what you have to say and watching you do what you do. Yeah, if I'm beginning, I will explain to somebody what my goal is. I'll tell them what my point of view is most of the time, because usually my point of view in going into a project is curiosity. And my mind changes many times about the things that I'm exploring and the people that I'm spending time with over the course of shooting it. And I tell people that I will treat them fairly, and there are times where I would point, if a tree falls, like, that's a film about a radical environmentalist that, when it came out, the spokesman for the Earth Liberation Front did press for the movie. The guy who, thinks it is morally defensible to burn, the buildings of your enemies, and the prosecutor who put those guys in prison did press for the movie. And to me, that felt great, because that said, all right, this is not the story that either of these guys would have made if it were their movie, but they all felt like it expressed the complexity and it treated them fairly. And so when I can point to that to somebody who I'm approaching to trust me to make a new film, sometimes that's helpful.
When I'm working with students, I find that you even have to sometimes explain their body language, counts, eye contact. Everybody is, humans are animals, and they understand trust implicitly, and you earn it in the first millisecond, and it's easily broken and never put back together. And in the same way, I have a film playing right after this, some other theater here, the opposition to the same-sex marriage. The question always comes up: how did you get him to participate? And the answer is, I had no judgment. In fact, one time, I'm the moderator, I shouldn't be talking about, but Robert De Niro, I was doing an American Masters a long time ago, and he said one of the most critical things I ever learned as a documentary filmmaker from an actor, where I said, how did you play all these despicable characters? And he said, if you can understand why someone does something, you can love them. And since then, that's been, I think, the goal of all my films. But once you've talked to somebody, as we all know, access, exclusive access, unique access, these are important. You don't want to start a film and then find out that your subject is working with another filmmaker, your funders would go ballistic, all kinds of things. How do you lock up the access? Now you've cast. What do you do? How do you make sure that they're there? Do you do paperwork? Do you just trust your gut? What do you do?
We just have basic release forms, and to be honest, I often don't. I usually get them to sign it after we've done what I consider to be sort of one of or the master interview, because I feel like, you know, if they wanted to pull out, I guess it's a little bit different in terms of the work that you do, but if they wanted to pull out, I want them to be able to pull out if they feel like the interview was uncomfortable in some way and it wasn't, you know, good for them as a human being. I don't want them to participate, because it's not going to be enjoyable. It's going to cause them stress. It's going to cause me stress. So it's not, and I don't ask people to sign a release form from the get-go. It's usually kind of about a third of the way into production, and I don't get them to sign it in front of me. I usually come back and pick it up. I think that thing that you said earlier about, you know, making sure that you honour, you know, what you say that you're going to do, and to keep your promises, and to be honourable and to be trustworthy, you have to establish that.
Continue to earn it.
Absolutely.
And yet I've been in situations where I knew if I didn't get them to sign it, I might be wasting a lot of money and a lot of time. Yeah. Rachel?
Release forms?
What do you do to get access agreements? Do you do this before? Do you care about it?
I do care about it, yeah, sure. Well, you know, if you go to your entertainment lawyers these days, they give you these boilerplate release forms that include everything from like life rights to exclusive access to all that. I don't do that. I don't pay anybody ever, so to ask somebody for life rights without giving them any kind of financial, you know, like I just don't feel good about that. So my release forms are really short and like very basic and
part of your trust scenario.
Yeah, like I want to feel good about what I'm like horribly ethical. Like I can't sleep at night if I feel like I'm doing something unethical. Like it's kind of troubling. So I have to feel good myself about what I'm doing, otherwise it'll haunt me. So I have these very simple release forms that give me permission to use the stuff that we filmed together for the project and for publicity for the project and things like that, and that's it. Like I'm not asking them for something beyond the scope. I get it as early as possible, because I can't afford to not have it. In the case of Cosmos Energy, which is the oil company, we actually had a contract, because we had to have a contract for a variety of reasons. When I started filming them, they were not a public company over the course of revealing something about the movie, but they become a public company while I'm filming, and there are certain legal restrictions about publicity for films that are, for companies that are going public. So there had to be, like, from their perspective, an agreement on that front. But I never give anybody, you know, permission to look or edit or comment, and I own all the footage, and that's really important.
You know, we're talking about independent documentaries that fall into that banner. Of course, if you guys are making films that are for television, that television's financing, everything kind of changes. On this level, you need to get these, you know, you need to use their boilerplate, which sometimes can ruin the deal. Some people will read this and it's too lawyered up and it's intimidating and it destroys the trust. I've lost people for television because their release forms are so intimidating. I did a whole TV series once, which I decided to produce with a company, you know, out of Canada, because otherwise the release form and the E&O requirements of their network made it impossible. And so out of Canada, they just have lower bar for that type of thing, and it wasn't as intimidating. Marshall, talk about how you keep people on the hook. It's not just casting, but then, because we're not offering money, and this is a problem in that it's a constant dance. They need to be there for us, and we're not really giving them anything except our hearts and our ability to listen. What sustains the relationship?
I mean, I guess what sustains any relationship, it's some personal give and take, and I think it's that ear. I mean, and I think it's finding people who have some interest in having a movie made about them. I mean, it does become difficult, and they do get irritated with you spending time and ruining intimate moments by being there with the camera and constantly, I mean, it's stressful to have somebody point a camera at you, and so they have to feel like they're getting something, and for me it's just, well, you want to have your story told in a movie, you want to be part of a movie, yeah, but it's hard.
Street Fight, let's just go back for a sec, one of my favorite films, and which you can set up and explain a little bit, but I always was amazed. I mean, unlike Wiener, which we know the guy will do anything for publicity, I was amazed that you had the access the whole time. And I imagine that how well you handled that has been a calling card for gaining access to other things since. Has it helped?
Yeah, I mean, that was, in some ways, I was helped by the fact that it was my first film. So I was no threat. I was just like some kid with a PD-150. The camera just looks like a toy. I mean, it was sort of a cool, you know, one of the first mini DV cameras, but it's like not an intimidating camera. And I don't use lights, and that one.
You set it up, maybe people don't know.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So the film is about Cory Booker, his first run for office of mayor of Newark, New Jersey. So, and at that point he was an unknown city councilman. Now he's a senator from New Jersey. But at that point he was just like a young guy who was finishing his first term as a city councilman in Newark and was thinking of running for mayor. That's when I met him, so I had to convince. He was actually easier to convince than a lot of people on his staff, and partly I think that's because of his personality, which is he thinks that he is a ethical person, and so he has nothing to hide. So any exposure would be good because he knows that he needs exposure if he wants to be in politics, and so some of the people who worked on the campaign, who had worked on, and he was very young. He'd done one city council campaign in his life, so he didn't know all of the mess that could get, you know, that could happen. And
imagine it was, but he also, he's an intelligent dude, and I'm sure he just, you must have been there for him emotionally. You must have worked day and night to maintain that trust, because.
Well, it's been a long time, and there was a bit of a cat and mouse game that would happen sometimes, where you know, there would be meetings that nobody would tell me about, and then I'd get there, and then, you know, there was that was a part of, you know, it was a frustration for me. My first conversation with him, I said to him, you know, how cool would it be if we had footage of Bill Clinton's first run for governor as a 32-year-old, and he thought, oh, that's
and
a good
he
point.
already knew. He's been gearing up for big time. And so you appealed to something he wanted. You offered him something he knew he'd need.
Sure, and he will say it explicitly. He'll say, we didn't have money, we didn't have, like, I was doing every interview with anybody that would talk to me. I was letting cameras into our office from broadcasters, you know, to come and do a little profile. And so he was just, he didn't have money and he didn't have fame, and so he was willing to
You were
kind of
willing
do
to give him
anything.
a national stage, and you found something you
Although,
wanted.
also, I wasn't giving him a national stage. There was no PBS, there was no anything at that point. It was just me with a camera. So I think I just was the first person to ask, honestly, and that.
Okay, I'm being told, let's go to question and answer, and this doesn't, these are all verite films and verite filmmakers. Your questions may pertain to other types of work, which has different casting situations. Yes?
I was just curious about the amount of time, like, in each of these films you guys spent.
During the filmmaking, not to get them to participate. So the question is, how long did each of these folks spend with their characters during the course of filmmaking? How intrusive is this, is what you want to know? So different, documentary films are lumped into one category, but it's, there's obviously different ways to skin this cat. Obviously, with Point and Shoot, Marshall's recent film is very different from Street Fight, but can you answer, how long do you spend with people, and why do you're making a film that you want to know how to describe this to people? Or, okay.
Well, Westbeth shot, it's sort of set in 1 year, and I'm obviously not from around these parts. It's not a Bronx accent. So I was travelling back and forth, and I did, I think, 5 blocks of about 3 or 4 weeks, but I'm also solo, so it meant that all the establishing shots, all of that sort of stuff I had to film as well. So and I would say that 50% of my time with the participants of the film or the characters of the film was filming, and 50% was hanging out, talking, trying to understand them and their world as best I could, and hanging out in the senior centre and having it happening in community gardens and so forth. So that's sort of how long I spent making the films. But I often would say to them, you know, can we film Tuesday afternoon? And that's all I would say, and I'd get there and I'd say, do you feel like doing an interview today, or what are you up to today? And really kind of let them lead me through their world, rather than say, all right, it's Tuesday, I need to film you going through your photo album. It just sort of organically happened.
That's a tough question, because that's a very observational film. Films like, you know, Point and Shoot, Marshall shot mainly as an interview with a specific person, pieced together then his footage. There's Hands on a Heart Body, which is a 48-hour moment that it takes place. It's got a dramatic question, all within 48 hours. So that's it. I think verite films, it depends. You know, tape is cheaper than film, so obviously, you know, things changed a lot when you can shoot yourself, or you know, your expense, but budget is king, story is king. That's a tough question to say. In general, like, it's 30 to 45 days to shoot a verite film or so, you know, unless you're Rachel and you shoot for 5 years, and it's the story's sprawling and you have to try to wrangle it. So,
Just curious, for these films, based on who you go out and see these films, I'm just curious how long they spend.
Rachel, talk about Point and Shoot. This is, I mean, not Point and Shoot. Talk about Big Men.
I could talk about it because I like.
Yeah, do that.
For Big Men?
Yeah.
Oh, God.
This is an extreme case. And Point and Shoot is the.
It's like not an example for anybody. Like, it's just not. This is
a guardrail, though.
It's like
stay away. You are.
Stay away. Like it's like a decade of my life on one film. It's like I don't know what I was thinking. I spent a year and a half traveling to Africa, getting to know people before I started shooting. It's easier when people just approach you and want to make a movie. I shot the first stuff by myself with an HVX, is that right? HVX? Because this new car technology, like, I wanted to experiment with it in places that didn't have any electricity. So there's a section of the film that's about these guys who are blowing up pipelines, and I shot that stuff myself. There's a very funny story about me with a guide, both of us in our underwear, wading through like a river of oil with me with the camera on my head. But that section of the film is a little story within the story. I shot in a day, right? As a camera test. In terms of the bigger arc, like the oil guys, once they said yes to me, I started shooting. And once people like that, same thing with Our Brand is Crisis, when the campaign said yes to me, I started shooting. I didn't wait. I actually, in Bolivia, I did one test trip without a camera, and then I started shooting. In terms of Big Men, I started shooting in 2007. I shot my last interview in 2011. The film came out in 2013.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. A lot of times, I don't know if you have the same experience, but for casting, even if I'm just meeting someone for the first time, I'll even just pull out my phone and let it roll, even if I never want to use it or see it, just to see how they react when they're being filmed, because it's different.
Big, very important, I think, to see how people react on camera. The footage of the little girl, there's a quick shot of it where she says, you know, when I grow up, I want to be the first woman to win the Daytona 500. That is the opening scene of her section of the movie, and it is the test footage. It is the moment that I'm talking to her for the very first time. We were filming that, and she's just dazzling.
Which is why I use casting people sometimes, is the first time they say something to me, I may want that on camera. That's when they're ready to blow.
This is like a whole debate about do you bring a camera or don't you? And like, I go back and forth on this one. Like, I remember there was this, with Our Brand is Crisis, I had this it's a film about this guy who ultimately becomes president of Bolivia. And then there are these horrible riots, and then I was in Bolivia again, and I was walking with the candidate who was then president up in the hills. And I had this crazy conversation with him, like with his bodyguards covering us with umbrellas, and it was like this really, where he said amazing things. And I didn't have a camera. And I had purposefully not brought a camera with me because I had wanted, in the midst of this riot environment, for him to understand that he could trust me and to talk to me without the camera. I made that deliberate choice. And then in that moment, I thought to myself, fuck, I'm never gonna not bring the camera ever again.
Didn't shoot it, it didn't happen.
Right? So like, I am of two minds about this question, because I believe very deeply in spending time with people without a camera. But I think you should always have it in the car.
And have it built and ready.
Totally ready to go.
Camera, batteries.
And phones, like this is like a really good point. Phones completely change everything. Like you can have it in your back pocket.
Can I take one more question? Yeah, go ahead. So the question is, if they said something when you first met them and the camera wasn't rolling, how do you get it on film later?
I sort of take a mental post-it note, and then I go away and I think about what question am I going to ask them in order that I will provoke them to talk about what it was that came up at lunch. And occasionally, I think, in my rushes, there's been a few moments where I've heard myself say things like, you know, when we were having lunch yesterday, you said blah, could you talk about that a little bit, please? And so, yeah, I sort of bring it up again, but, you know, lunch is casual. When you're in somebody's home and they're sitting in a chair and there's nobody else around, then that's when kind of the emotional magic happens.
I would caution you about digging in too deep before you're actually shooting. That's a big, big no-no.
Yeah, that lunch is not about doing an interview. It's really just about trying to sort of understand who this person is and what their world's all about.
And I try not to do that. I try not to have the lunch because, for that precise reason. I mean, as little as I can find out as possible, enough to know that this is the right person to spend time with is what I'm going for. And even when I get somewhere, when we first arrive, I'll talk about sports. I'll find, you know, whether things that I know I'm actually not interested in and are not going to be in the movie, because I think it's super hard to get people to repeat stuff. And people, they just know that you've heard this story before.
You want them to know of you as the person with the camera, and that's the relationship. I don't feel you want them to start talking until the camera's built anytime.
I must say I do a lot of small talk when the camera's coming out, with the bag and the tripod and so forth.
But if you need to convince them to be on camera, if you're not in the circumstance where they're coming to you saying, hey, gee, I want to be in your movie, then you have to do that. Like you have, like, so it's a different, how many?
Sometimes the phone, like sometimes I can do some of those pre-interview or whatever on the phone, and then it feels new still when I'm with them.
How many people are in your crew when you're shooting?
3. Usually either I'm shooting with the sound person and then somebody dealing with cards and stuff, or I'm doing sound. If I have to interview somebody, then I do the sound, because I find it difficult to shoot and think about focus and framing while I'm talking to people. So usually 3.
Do we have to wrap up, Deborah? One more question. Yes, back there.
Do you ever find yourselves having to bail on individual characters or?
Yes.
Great question. In other words, do you use everybody you're filming, or do you film more? When do you decide? Like, do you have a? Is that your question?
Yeah, or even just like entire ideas.
Do you run into just sort of empty holes there? And yeah.
For Big Men, I shot a whole story with the U.S. Navy in both Ghana and Nigeria. I have like a whole other film in the can that's not in my movie. I got access to the U.S. Navy. I filmed with them for a year, 2 years, and I didn't use it.
For Westbeth, I shot an interview with Mr. Bob Gruen, the photographer who's probably most famous for the John Lennon portraiture. And I just sort of decided very early on there wasn't really a lot of conflict in his story, and I guess he wasn't still sort of, he was at a different sort of space in his life. I guess his story didn't really fit with the other 3 stories. So, you know, I asked him, could I just use the one shot of him in the film, and he was great about it, so, yeah.
And I have secondary characters that I have spent a ton of time with, thinking it would be a storyline or thinking that they would be. But with Race of Dreams, we just picked 3, and those were the 3.
I think if you know your story and you're looking, those were archetypes Marshall had in his head he was looking for, and he found them. And I think as you know your storyline, you can spend less time. If you're muddled about your story, the same way it's difficult to figure out how to edit the film, it's difficult to know who to shoot. The clearer you are, story is king, and that helps motivate choosing your cast.
Yeah, the Navy thing, the reason I shot it was because it's a verite film, and I didn't know if the individual oil company story was going to be a story, or I thought there would be conflict, but I didn't know if there would be conflict, and if there weren't any conflict, I still needed to make a movie. So I was covering myself so that I could have made a different film about a much bigger macro situation in case the micro story hadn't have been as much of a story as it turned out to be. And once that micro story became very clear, and it was a super detail-oriented micro story, it became clear that I didn't need the macro context to the same extent.
All right, well, I think we'll give you your home addresses. You can just go to their house for dinner and continue the conversation.
Well, hopefully our panelists can stick around a little bit outside and continue answering some questions. We just have to cut a little bit short because we have to do a turnover for the Sony premiere, which is happening next. So I just want to thank everybody so much. Thank you, Eddie and Rachel and Rowan and Marshall.